The stars shimmered above Earth like indifferent gods, silent witnesses to the judgment unfolding in orbit. Inside the domed chamber of the Galactic Council, Commander Ilara Voss stood alone, her uniform immaculate, her gaze defiant. Around her, delegates 100 species murmured in disdain, their voices filtered through translation nodes that softened nothing. A single human among beings older than civilization itself, on trial not just for her actions, but for the perceived sins of an entire race. Chancellor Iravex of the Jatari struck the dais with his staff. Humanity has violated the core peace accords on 12 separate occasions. You weaponized forbidden technologies, colonized restricted zones, and defied direct council intervention. Ilara didn't flinch. We survived. A ripple of disapproval passed through the chamber. The word echoed louder than it should have. Survival at the cost of order. Iravex hissed. You brought war to a galaxy that welcomed you. The verdict was inevitable. Centuries of human ambition, their rapid rise, their refusal to yield to alien hierarchy. It had finally ignited a coalition. The Council's decision was unanimous. Exile. As a decree echoed across systems, Earth and its colonies became ghosts overnight. Trade ceased. Communications went dark. Stargates leading to human sectors blinked out of existence. Planets relying on galactic aid withered. Panic spread like wildfire. Ilara's shuttle broke orbit under a veil of silence, returning to a world now alone in the dark. In the years that followed, silence became humanity's cradle. Earth, stripped of its place among the stars, turned inward. The remaining colonies clustered around Sol, like children clinging to a dying fire. Supplies dwindled. Unity fractured. But not all was lost. On Europa Station, buried deep in the ice, a council of exiled minds gathered. Scientists, engineers, ex-military leaders, survivors who refused to accept extinction. Among them was Dr. Cale Adrian, a cyberneticist once lauded across 3 systems, now reduced to scavenging defunct satellites for salvage. His ideas were deemed radical before the exile. Now they were lifelines. Ilara was right, he muttered, adjusting a schematic that glowed faintly on his palm. They fear what they can't control. Which is why we don't ask anymore, said Voss, stepping into the cold chamber, her presence unchanged, sharp, unyielding. We take what we need. Cale looked up. You've seen what's out there, haven't you? She nodded. Beyond the fringe, there are systems the Council abandoned long ago. Ruins. Technologies they buried because they were afraid of them. And you want us to dig them up? Cale asked. No, I want us to master them. That night, in the frozen dark, a decision was made. Humanity's fall had torn them from the galaxy, but in exile they found clarity. No longer bound by treaties or galactic oversight, innovation surged. Ethics gave way to necessity. Entire research fields once banned were now fair game. On Mars, fusion cores powered subterranean forges. On Titan, AI consciousness was integrated into orbital defense systems. Genetic experiments resumed in the asteroid labs of the belt. Children born in these years were no longer raised on stories of Earth's glory, but betrayal. The Council had not simply exiled them, they had tried to erase them. And so the stories changed. They spoke of revenge, of justice, of return. Commander Voss traveled between colonies in an aging cruiser, now rebranded Resolute. It wasn't much, but its crew believed. She remembered every name, every face, every station that had gone silent during the Council's blockade. When she stood before the gathered survivors, her voice rang clear. They thought exile would end us, but they didn't bury us, they planted us. In one of the outer colonies, a boy named Ivan watched the transmission, his eyes wide. Born long after the exile, he had never seen Earth, never walked in unfiltered sunlight. But in Voss's voice, he heard something that felt like fire, like destiny. He turned to his father, a mechanic covered in grease and cynicism. Will we go back? His father hesitated. Then, we won't have to. One day they'll come to us. And yet, it wasn't hope that built a new empire. It was anger, determination, a need to prove that humanity was more than the sum of its exile. The Council of Survivors became a conclave, The conclave became a government. And then something else, something greater. Not a democracy, not anymore. A directive, a singular will. To survive, to expand, to dominate. In the shadow of the old stars, a new human order took shape. The ship Resolute hovered at the edge of a dead system, where a shattered ring of moons encircled a pale star. Voss stood on the command deck, eyes fixed on a silent structure floating in the void, a station, ancient and vast, left behind by something far older than the Council. Lights pulsed faintly along at hull, as though it had waited for them. "Send a team," she said. "We're going in." Beside her, Kale watched with unease. "We don't know what's inside." "We didn't know what was in fire when we first touched it," she replied. "But we learned. We always learn." As the boarding shuttles launched, the past faded behind them. There would be no going back. Not to the Council's order, not to Earth's innocence. The galaxy had cast them out. Now, it would remember their name. The ship Resolute drifted above a world cloaked in ash and iron. Below, 1,000 forges roared, their chimneys piercing the low-hanging clouds like obsidian spires. What had once been a lifeless rock was now the beating heart of humanity's rebirth. Oblivion Prime. It was not beauty they sought here, but function, strength, power. From this planet, the Iron Star Empire had begun to take shape. Commander Alara Voss stood on the observation deck of the Citadel, the central command spire of Oblivion Prime. Her eyes swept the horizon, where towers gleamed like blades and orbital factories bled molten light into the skies. The world groaned with life unnatural. Human life. She no longer wore the colors of Earth's military. Her armor was obsidian and silver, etched with the mark of the Phoenix, reborn through fire. She had become more than a soldier. She was the architect of the Empire's will. Behind her, Kale Adrian adjusted the neural interface on his wrist. He looked older, the skin beneath his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights and the strain of innovation. The synthesis is holding. The new generation of warforms. They'll surpass anything the Council ever feared. Voss nodded, her tone measured. And the minds? Kale hesitated. We've stabilized the integration rates. Volunteers are adapting to the cognitive mesh. They see faster, think in layers, plan like machines. In 5 years, they'll command entire fleets with a thought. They'll need to, Voss said. We're not done expanding. The Empire had grown beyond its scattered colonies. Worlds once thought uninhabitable now bore human cities, shielded beneath domes and orbiting mirrors. Terraforming drones, powered by scavenged alien relics, had turned dust into soil. The lost knowledge of ancient civilizations, buried in derelict ruins beyond the fringe, was now their own. But progress had a price. In the underbelly of Oblivion Prime, where the light of the forges never reached, the descendants of the first exiles toiled in silence. Clone workers bred for endurance, genetically altered for obedience. Their minds were sharpened for purpose, but dulled for freedom. The Empire had no room for weakness, and mercy had been the first casualty of rebirth. Kale had once protested the use of clones. Now, he supervised their development. There's something dangerous about forgetting where we came from, he said one evening as he and Voss walked through the cloning vaults. Rows of incubation pods glowed dimly, each containing a life sculpted by human hands. We didn't forget, Voss replied. We evolved. He studied her for a moment, and if we become what we once feared, her expression didn't change. Then we'll fear nothing. In orbit, the first Iron Star fleet assembled. Starships, sleek, angular, painted in black and crimson, bristled with armaments never before seen. AI captains directed them with brutal precision, and their crews were hybrids, soldiers enhanced with cybernetics, trained from birth to think tactically, to obey without hesitation. Voss christened the flagship Sovereign. It was a fortress, not a vessel, a statement to the galaxy. She stood upon its bridge as it completed its first hypershift, watching distant stars blur into streaks. She did not feel the awe of discovery, only the weight of inevitability. Send scouts beyond the rim, she ordered. Chart every system. We take what we need and leave nothing behind. It was not conquest. It was reclamation. Back on Oblivion Prime, a child named Ivan stood at the foot of a monument etched with the names of lost colonies. He was older now, no longer the boy who once asked if they would go back, but a young man molded by the Empire, selected for advanced combat training, marked for command. He watched the dropship rise into the sky, engines burning with blue flame, and felt the pulse of destiny in his chest. The stories of Exile were not history. They were fuel. One night, while training in the simulation halls, Ivan encountered a figure cloaked in old military garb. The man fought like a ghost, every move a lesson. When the session ended, the stranger said only one thing: revenge is not purpose. Survival is not victory. Know the difference. The next morning, Ivan awoke with a new directive etched into his thoughts. He didn't know who the man was, no name, no record, but the message remained. Elsewhere in the outer territories, resistance flared, not from the Council. They remained distant, perhaps still unaware of the Empire's scale, but from fractured human remnants who rejected the new order. A splinter colony on Mirian Delta declared independence, flying the old Earth banner. Voss ordered a single cruiser to respond. It returned within the hour. Mirian Delta burned behind it. There was no room for dissension. Kale watched the aftermath with a growing hollowness in his chest. We're creating monsters. They were always there, Voss said. We just stopped hiding them. He turned to her, the firelight from a burning sky reflecting in his eyes. And what happens when there's no one left to fight? She looked past him toward the stars. Then we become gods. The statement was not arrogance. It was inevitability. The Iron Star Empire was no longer a reaction to exile. It had become a force of its own, self-sustaining, ever-expanding, guided by a single doctrine: never be weak again. Above the Empire, the stars awaited. Some burned, others slept, but all would remember what came next. The sky above Aurelia, Seven shattered in silence as the scout ship Harbinger blinked into real space. To the untrained eye, it was just another vessel, sleek, black, nondescript. But to the Galactic Council's forward monitoring station, its presence was an impossibility. That region of space was uninhabitable, unreachable, or so they believed. Inside Harbinger, Commander Alara Voss stood beside Ivan, now a fleet officer, his expression unreadable beneath a helm laced with neural threads. The years had carved discipline into his frame and purpose into his mind. He had become what the Empire required: efficient, relentless, loyal. Voss studied the holographic projection of the Council beacon hovering before them. The signal it emitted pulsed with the old arrogance of order. It was a relic of the time before exile, a reminder of the power that once cast humanity aside like refuse. They still believe we're ghosts, Ivan said quietly. Then let's teach them to fear the dead, Voss replied. The Harbinger cloaked again, slipping into the void like a whisper. 2 weeks later, across 3 Council sectors, automated stations failed simultaneously. Relay gates deactivated. Hyperspace lanes collapsed into silence. Surveillance fleets dispatched to investigate found only fragments, metal torn like flesh, AI cores burned clean. No messages, no survivors. At first, the Council assumed a rogue pirate faction or a black hole anomaly. The idea that humans, exile forgotten, had returned was inconceivable. But then came the broadcast. It hijacked every channel, every frequency. The face of Alara Voss filled the void, lit in cold silver. Her voice was calm, deliberate, devoid of threat, but thick with finality. This is not a declaration of war. You declared it when you exiled us. This is simply the reckoning. The message ended. Across the galaxy, systems held their breath. The Council convened in panic. Chancellor Irivex, older now, his scales dull by time, slammed his fist on the crystal dais. It cannot be them. We destroyed their path, blockaded their systems. They were nothing. They were desperate, came a voice in the shadows. And desperation builds monsters. On the rim world of Foros, where Council influence remained strong, a human fleet emerged from hyperspace. The defenders scrambled ships into orbit. They never had a chance. In minutes, The Iron Star fleet dismantled orbital defenses with surgical precision. Troops deployed in metallic pods rained from the sky, striking with inhuman coordination. They spoke no demands. They offered no negotiation. By nightfall, Foro surrendered, not because it could not fight, but because its people, mostly non-human, long allies of the Council, no longer believed the Council could protect them. News of the attack spread faster than the flames. Some saw the Empire as tyrants, others as saviors. On more than one Council world, resistance groups raised a phoenix banner. They remembered humans not as conquerors, but as victims once cast into the abyss. Kale Adrian watched these shifts unfold through intelligence feeds on Oblivion Prime. He saw the tide turning not just through firepower, but through ideology. Humanity had become myth, a symbol of retaliation, of power born from injustice. And myths, Kale knew, were more dangerous than fleets. He met with Voss in the Central Command Chamber, where new campaign maps glowed red across half the galaxy. "It's happening faster than we predicted," he said. "It's not speed that matters," she replied. "It's precision." Kale hesitated. "There are Council members requesting negotiations." "Let them beg," Voss said. "We didn't come for peace." But something else gnawed at the edges of Kale's thoughts. He'd heard whispers, rumors of experiments beyond ethical comprehension. Human minds spliced into warships, entire moon hollowed out for unknown purposes. He had created the tools of the Empire, but he no longer knew the extent of their use. And deep within himself, he feared they were no longer human at all. Elsewhere, Ivan led a campaign across the Arctic expanse, where an ancient Council archive remained buried beneath an ice world. His task was clear: retrieve what could be used, erase what couldn't. But when his squad descended into the vault, he found something unexpected: a library of Council data on human history, psychology, projections of their exile. It wasn't fear that had driven the Council to banish Earth. It was prophecy, a cold, calculated decision made not because of what humanity had done, but because of what they might become. In one file, he read the words: "Humanity is not dangerous because it desires power. It is dangerous because it refuses to stop once it has it." Later, in the quiet of his quarters, Ivan stared at the stars outside. He remembered the voice of the simulation ghost, the warning to distinguish survival from victory. He wondered which path they had taken. A call summoned him to the bridge. Voss's transmission awaited. "We move on the inner systems," she said. "The core worlds. The Council must fall." Ivan nodded, but inside, something twisted. As the Iron Star Empire advanced, the galaxy fractured. The Council splintered. Old alliances collapsed under the weight of fear. 1,000 worlds, once proud and sovereign, now waited for the storm behind the stars. And the storm was coming. The skies above the Council's capital world, Tirith, turned black at noon. It began with silence. No broadcasts, no trade signals, not even a faint hum of stellar traffic. Then the shadows arrived. The Iron Star Armada emerged from hyperspace like a scar across the fabric of reality, a wall of darkened ships etched in crimson light. There were no warnings, no ultimatums, only inevitability. In the high spire of governance, Chancellor Irevek stared through the armor glass with a tremble he could no longer hide. The galaxy's most fortified system, protected by generations of strategic investment, now felt brittle. Obsolete, around him, aides rushed to and from stations, their movements erratic with panic. Holograms flicker with incoming reports. Defense grids overwhelmed. AI battalions collapsing, planetary shields cracking like eggshells. "They don't seek occupation," said Council Strategos Nerlin, voice hollow. "They're not here to conquer. They're here to end us." Irevex turned to the ancient chamber table, once the heart of interstellar diplomacy. Now it felt like a relic. Summon the War Council. Immediately. But the War Council was gone. Their ships had been the first to fall. Above, Sovereign hovered in silence, wreathed in kinetic barriers and crawling with weapon arrays. On its bridge, Commander Alara Voss stood at the center of the storm she had spent decades engineering. Her eyes, once bright with fury, now held a colder flame, purpose refined into something far more potent. "Begin planetary suppression," she said. No orbital bombardments. Precision only. We don't need a massacre. Kale Adrian stood beside her, arms folded, face unreadable. Why not finish it? Burn it down. They'd do the same to us. No, Voss said, because we're not them. Kale laughed bitterly. We passed that line a long time ago. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to Ivan, now a commander in his own right. His presence radiated discipline. But there was a hesitance beneath his composure, something that hadn't faded, even as his name became legend among the fleet. You'll lead the ground strike, Voss said. Secure the spire. Bring the Chancellor to me, alive. Ivan saluted, but as he turned to leave, her voice followed him. Be careful. Ending a war is harder than starting one. He paused, nodded once, and disappeared into the hum of the launch bay. On the surface, chaos reigned. Dropships fell from the sky in controlled descent, touching down with surgical precision around Tiritha's defensive nodes. Troopers in black armor poured forth, moving like a single entity, part man, part machine, all trained for this moment. The resistance was brutal, but uncoordinated. Council soldiers fought with desperation, not belief. Ivan led his strike team through the city's scorched avenues, dodging fire that ricocheted from energy barriers. Around them, towers crumbled and automated defense mechs detonated under EMP bursts. Yet amid the carnage, Ivan saw civilians watching from shattered windows, some fearful, others strangely still. This wasn't a conquest. This was a reckoning. Inside the spire, Irovex waited in the council chamber. The other delegates had fled or fallen. He stood alone beneath the galaxy's seal, hands folded behind his back, pride clinging to his shoulders like a dying breath. When Ivan entered, flanked by armored officers, the Chancellor met him with weary defiance. Are you here to kill me, Commander? Ivan said nothing. He gestured, and the Chancellor was escorted away in silence. Hours later, aboard the Sovereign, Voss stood face-to-face with a leader who once banished her species. Irovex had aged. Lines etched deep into his scaled features. The gleam of superiority long faded. I remember your voice, he said. The day of exile. You were defiant even then. I was right even then, Voss replied. And now we end this. There is nothing left to end, Irovex said. You've already won. Voss shook her head. No, we've only ensured they remember. Kale watched the exchange from a distance. He saw the ghost behind their words, the years of pain, fire, and silence. But even in victory, he felt no peace. Later, he found Ivan alone in one of the ship's memory chambers, reviewing footage from the battle. Civilians running, soldiers surrendering, a planet breaking without shattering. I saw your hesitation, Kale said quietly. I didn't hesitate, Ivan replied. You did, and it's good that you did. Ivan's eyes flicked toward him. Wasn't this always the plan? No, Kale said. The plan was to survive. What we became after that, we didn't plan for this. Outside, the stars blinked uncaring. The council had fallen. Its systems were being absorbed or neutralized. The galaxy, fractured and exhausted, no longer resisted. They submitted not out of fear, but out of recognition. A new order had risen from the ashes, one forged by fire, but not consumed by it. In the command chamber, Voss stood alone, staring at a star map that now glowed entirely red. Her empire, her legacy. Yet for the first time, the silence pressed in heavier than before. She whispered to herself, not in triumph, but in remembrance. Exile was never our ending. It was our beginning. The war was over, but the future, unshaped and waiting, was far more dangerous than any enemy they had faced.